everybody, here is Elena Berman, and we have in our studio a very important guest. It will clear up so many questions for what's going on right now, and you have opportunity to ask questions under the video, and next time this person will give you more information. But please value this time, because this information you will not hear anywhere. So let me introduce you, Simon Treselyan, who is international warrior. From the one of the youngest karate black belt in Britain to adopting an authentic warrior lifestyle, Simon understands that he has to fight for people freedom and for people life. He is very careful with his lifestyle. And this is a person who you would love to rely and who you would love to have as a friend in your life. So, Simon, thank you for coming and thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me on. I look forward to it.
Okay, so I have a lot of questions for you, but first, could you please explain most important information about you, who you are? And
yeah, I spent 20 years in a very specific special forces unit with the British Army. So it was an intelligence covert ops operation. And during that time, I saw what made people winners. I saw what made people losers. I gained a lot of experience in how the world works, but also how it doesn't work and how it works for some people and how there are certain factions and power brokers within the world that I think people are only now beginning to see. They're seeing in their politics, they're seeing in the divisions, whether it be in Australia or the UK or in Europe or in America. There are specific divisions that are happening right now. And these are not coincidences. They're being contrived, they're being controlled. And a lot of this is actually to bring what, as a lot of people have been talking about for a lot of years, a globalist new world order under people that are not elected, that do not have your best interests in mind. And I've been working with these people for a lot of time until I found out who they truly were and who I was. And for the rest of my life, I've been pretty much working against them. So it's put me in a very rather unique situation to have an insider view as to what is really going on in the world. I look at the news cycle through a different lens than other people.
Yeah, it's wonderful. That's why you are here. And I'm very curious about your opinion on what's going on. So many people still in illusion or in delusion that war between two countries of basically it is a family going against each other. So what happened in reality? Because we know what's going on behind the scene.
Well, see, after the fall of the Soviet Union, they created a power vacuum. You had two largely balanced sides. You had the USSR and, of course, most of Eastern Europe. And then you had the NATO allies. So it was a nice balance. Both had the similar amount of nuclear weapons, which they knew they could destroy each other. And this is what they call it MAD, mutually assured destruction. So it created what they called the Cold War. So after the Second World War, which was particularly nasty, the globalists came in to push Germany up, rebuild Germany, to create a center stage of Europe. And it's that then began the balance against the Soviet Union. So the Second World War was always going to be about going against the Soviet Union for everybody, not just the Germans. So what happened when the USSR fell under Glasnost? They created, as I said, this power vacuum. So now you have a much weakened Russia. You have all of the old Warsaw Pact countries basically either becoming neutral or becoming more pro-Western. And that created more of a problem that was going to come out at some point. And it's coming out now. It's coming out very much now. Because the whole world as far as the globalists see, they need balanced power. Because if you're constantly dividing people, you can conquer them. You can actually say, well, it's their fault, and therefore people are then motivated to create action and to vote in certain ways because they believe there is an enemy that can be defined. And people will say, look, it's over there. They're the Russians. It's the Russians that are the problem. How many times have we heard that in the last 5 years? It's the Russians, it's the Russians, it's the Russians. So the truth is that we are being manipulated, and it's not just by our politicians, it's by globalist concerns. And by that, I mean large banking interests, the pharmaceutical companies, the military industrial complex. All of these have vested interests in creating this balance of power, which they control both sides. So it's not as if it's right wing or left wing, they're both wings of the same bird. And that is really what has been happening. So we're being played in a lot of ways. And unfortunately, when people are played, they get very emotional and they start to react. And what we're seeing is people are dying for this reaction. We're seeing Ukrainian civilians and soldiers dying. We're seeing Russians being sent to this war where, as far as they're concerned, they're Slavic brothers. Why are they even in Ukraine? It's only...
What's the reason? I mean, what's the solution for them? Can you imagine somebody will come to your home? What do you do? Of course, you will attack back.
I mean, it's a, I know it's a communist country, but it's essentially a fascist dictatorship where the the media is controlled by the state. All aspects are controlled by the state, whether it's food supply, whether it's jobs, or all the control of all aspects of your life. And that is what is largely the socialist agenda for here. It's actually a globalist agenda. The globalist agenda is that a very unelected ruling elite will marshal in, almost like shepherds, if you like. They will shepherd the sheep, which are the people. And the people will just be glad to work in the sprocket factory, get on public transport, earn just enough money to be able to feed their family, but nothing more, nothing to be able to save. They can manipulate the market. So anytime that they do build up a nest egg of savings, they can just pop that bubble. As we saw with the dot-com bubble, we're seeing now with the Bitcoin bubble. We saw it with the subprime problems as well. So that when mums and dads feel comfortable about investing in things that they don't understand, things like the stock market, Bitcoin, real estate, then it builds up, and the people that do understand then collapse those markets, suck out all that money and take it for their own. And that's what we've been seeing. So, excuse me. So we're seeing a lot of this going on within the world itself. Now, Ukraine is a very specific country. It's one of the biggest countries in Europe. But strategically, it is so important. I mean, it's the 4th largest producer of grain in the world. So all of the Middle East, all of Africa gets its grain from Ukraine. And of course, they haven't been able to create the harvest this time around. And that which has been harvested has been stolen by the Russians in order to try and augment the losses that they're finding with not being able to sell their oil. So Ukraine has always been the breadbasket. It was the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. Essentially, it fed the Soviet Union. Now it's feeding Europe because it straddles 2 ideologies. And this is exactly what you're seeing in Ukraine right now. So it straddles the old communist sort of Russian Slavic areas as well. So you have this real appeal that's back to the old Russian Empire. And then you have a more westernized area, because you remember that the Ukrainians had their own SS units during the Second World War. So half of Ukraine was working with the Russians and half of Ukraine was working with the Nazis. And that's what we're seeing right now. And that's what the Russians are using as an excuse to go into Ukraine, saying we're going to try and denazify the place. They've been talking about this for like 40 years. So Putin obviously has delusions of grandeur. He regrets very much the fall of the Soviet Empire and wants to bring everyone back into line. Now, the Russian army, I mean, when I was in the military and I was there during the 80s, you know, against the, you know, the Soviet Union, and I did a lot of work in intelligence. I became an expert on Russian tactics. And I knew that the Russians were never coming. They were never going to invade the West. You know, so when you look even through history, the West has invaded Russia twice. Once under Napoleon, which had the biggest army in the world at the time, arguably the best led. They went into Russia, got stopped at Moscow, lost 1 million men, had to retreat, and he never was able to build another army again. The second time, Adolf Hitler, 1941, Operation Barbarossa, charged into Russia in the wintertime, got their asses kicked. They lost a couple of million men and had to retreat. And that was largely, again, the biggest army, the best led. Conversely, Russia has only attacked the West twice. First time in the First World War. And at that point, they lost not only 17 million men, but they also lost their whole political structure. It spurred the Bolshevik Revolution, and the Tsar got killed. The whole of Russia was just totally decimated. The second time was during the Second World War. This time they lost 28 million men. And what we're finding is that Russia itself, they are indomitable in spirit when they're being attacked. They're homebodies. You know, they're largely, not with no disrespect, but they're a peasant stock. They're not like the Western nations like Spain and France and England, which went out of their way to colonize. Russia has never colonized. You know, they're like China. They just stay where they are. You attack them, you've got problems. But when they try to attack outside, there's no motivation. They don't want to go outside their own country. They love their own country. So this is what we're finding now in Ukraine, is that I think that the Russian soldiers were obviously sold a false bill of goods to say that, you know, the Ukrainians needed denazification. We're going to walk in there. It's going to be flowers and hand clapping, and we're going to liberate our Slavic brothers. Everyone's going to be happy. And of course, you know, quite the opposite occurred. And having seen now, you know, with hindsight, you can understand it, because under military doctrine, you see, when you attack, you should always attack 3-1 in the advantage. Okay, so you don't go toe-to-toe with someone if you've got the same amount of troops. If you're attacking, you have to have 3-1. And when I saw the amount of troops that were amassing on the Ukrainian border being only 200,000, which is really a quarter of what Russia has under arms. And given that they'd already had the separatists declare the regional republics of Luhansk and Donetsk, I thought, well, okay, so that's what they're going to do. They're just going to go in there. They're going to annex the place. They're going to fortify it. It's a big industrial place. You know, it will give Putin a political score to say that he's gone in there, denazified everyone. Everyone's good. Now we've got...
And actually it does.
Yeah. Now, I think what happened at that point, and this is borne out when you look at the evidence afterwards, when 400 intelligence officers of the Russian organizations were sacked, is that they were giving false information. They said, yeah, the Ukrainians are going to be up for it. You've got a comedian as a president. He's pro-Western. You put any pressure on him, he's going to run for the hills. You know, he's going to go into exile, you know, in Germany somewhere or Poland or wherever. Someone's just going to pay for him. They'll helicopter him and his family out, and we'll just put in a puppet government. That's what they told him. That's why they went to Kiev. So they went there, and of course that didn't happen. And they got stuck in Kiev, and really it was an embarrassment, a massive embarrassment for the Russian military. So they had to withdraw, and now what you're seeing is, of course, they're going to their original objectives, which was to secure the Russian separatists in the two breakaway republics. But also Russia has a real weakness in that it has a navy, but that navy is restricted to they're very much the northern ports on the Baltic Sea. So they like to have warm weather ports, which is of course in the Black Sea, which is basically run by Turkey. So the Black Sea Fleet gives them access to the Mediterranean and everywhere else. Right now, most of the Russian fleet is in Kaliningrad, which is stuck between two NATO countries. So it's the precarious position. So they need warm water ports, and that's why they took on Crimea and Sevastopol. That's why they spent so much energy trying to get Mariupol. And of course, the other plan was to go into Odessa to secure the whole of the Black Sea, to basically landlock the rest of Ukraine, which would then not be able to export its grain, and eventually Ukraine would fall. That was the plan. Putin did not for one moment assess the coming together of NATO. NATO has never liked each other, okay? When you consider who the NATO members are, all of them have fought against each other through history. You got the Germans versus the French. Everyone fights in Belgium. Holland was against Britain at one point. Britain has fought 2 world wars against Germany. It fought something like 14 wars against France. None of them like each other. They've all got conflicting cultures. They've all got massive egos. And having served with NATO countries, there is so much distrust within NATO. So, but all of a sudden, and this is what happens, and we're seeing this in a number of areas in the world, when you have a shared enemy, you come together. So right now, if someone attacked the United States, it doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican, you'd come together as Americans. And that's natural. It's a natural thing. So Putin misassessed how Europe was going to react. And now, you got Sweden and Finland, 2 absolutely neutral countries. The only other neutral country is Switzerland. And even Switzerland said, will start giving off against the Russians. So he's totally overplayed his hand. They never liked the thought of Finland joining the NATO alliance, because the Russians lost in Finland in 1939 in the Winter War. So Finland is one of these countries where if you don't attack it in the right season, you're gone. Sweden has massive innovation in regards to armaments and warplanes. Now they've come on board as well. And because of Russian antics in the Black Sea, they've alienated Turkey, which was actually one of the more Russian-leaning NATO members. One would argue that Turkey, even though it's like the 5th largest army in the world, was a weak part of NATO, because they're Muslim and have an ideological difference between most of the NATO countries. But also it's on the wings of NATO, what they call. So it's on the flank. And if Russia could subvert Turkey, that could change everything. But he hasn't done. So what's happened now, of course, is that the Russians, what we assessed that they had much better technology than they did. But in regards to the military, I've always said, this is why I wrote a paper back in 1981 about why the Russians weren't coming, and there are fundamental reasons why the Russian war machine doesn't work. And the first one is command and control. You have 105 different languages in Russia. And because they never wanted to have units that were like a Ukrainian unit or a Georgian unit or a Belarusian unit, because they never trusted each other, that would lead to potentially coups. So they split everyone up. So you would have a rifle section with a Mongol, with a Kazakh, with an Uyghur, with a Belarusian, with a normal Russian and a Chechen, and they couldn't speak to each other. So they had to do flags or very, very basic Russian. So the command and control was rubbish, and also they have an officer class and everyone else is like a private or what they call a senior sergeant. So they don't have what we have in the West, which is a non-commissioned officer group, everything from corporals and sergeants, which really run the military. The officers are there to give leadership, but the true military is run by NCOs. The Russians don't have that at all. So that was going to be a big problem for them. Also, they lack medical care. There's only one ambulance per battalion. So that means they can only evacuate 4 people out of a battalion group of, say, 1,000. And the Russians know this. They know if they get wounded, they're not getting out. So that doesn't help morale. And also, they don't have what we have in the West. We have what is called light aid detachments, which are basically mechanics that follow the army. So if a tank breaks down or runs out of track or the wheels come off or whatever, then it will be recovered, it will be repaired on site and back into the battle. The Russians don't have that. They have very, very few recovery vehicles and they can't repair. So once the vehicle either runs out of fuel, once the vehicle stops for whatever reason, it's done. Now it's a roadblock. And we're seeing this.
It used to be, not now.
Yeah, but we're seeing this. What's happened with the Ukrainian farmers with their tractors just dragging these machines away. So the Russians have a real problem with supply as well, supply chains, which I find disturbing considering that they're next door. Literally, Ukraine is next door to Russia. You should be able to supply them really, really well, but it hasn't happened, and that's why they've lost so much equipment to the point now where they're becoming combat ineffective. So Russia has thrown everything at Severodonetsk because they want to secure the Luhansk area. If they can do that, they know that they can't then attack anymore. They'll have to just not retreat, but they'll dig in, they'll secure their areas. They're in a safe area because most of the people are Russian there anyway. And that's when they'll try to broker a peace. And they'll say, look, you just give us this, leave us with Crimea, we'll leave you alone and we're all good. Right now, with the amount of weaponry coming in and the fact that Zelensky has now got another 1 million civilians that are taking up arms. I mean, Russia only started with 200,000, and now you're going to pour another 1 million people with rifles. That's a problem. And now you're training Ukrainians in the UK and in Poland to be able to operate these very sophisticated artillery systems. So it means now that they don't have to go toe to toe with rifles, in the streets. They can just back off and they can just fire missiles like the Russians have done. And the Western equipment is more sophisticated. So I see it's going to be a lot of pain for Russia. In the meantime, we're getting reports that Putin is sick, and he may well be. There's reports of him having leukemia. So again, what happens if he dies? There is only going to be 2 options. So the generals will take over, or the oligarchs. But someone will take over and either go, to the extremes. They'll either continue the war and try and push NATO, or they'll try to get back to normal and make money again, and try and get the fuel taps placed on again and say, sorry, it wasn't us, it was Putin. We know he was a bad guy and now he's gone. So let's get back to being friends. That's what I think is likely to happen. But Russia now will be sidelined for at least a generation. This is going to be 30 years before Russia gets anywhere close to being as abundant as it was even 10 years ago. So the globalist concerns are to try and create this. Now, the other aspect is that America is too strong for the globalists. This is why they want to try and destroy America or divide America. Because America, basically, America runs the internet. America runs largely culture throughout the world. When you saw all of the businesses that left Russia, You know, things like McDonald's and, you know, H&M and all these, you know, westernized countries. I mean, America pretty much runs the world. If you want to sell fuel, you have to sell it in petrodollars. It needs to be converted into US dollars before you can sell it. So America has always done that. They've always run the world. But from the globalist point of view, that doesn't work. So they need to try and create another balance. Now, part of the balance was to create a balance between Russia and China, so that China and Russia would create a gold-backed ruble that people would start to trade in. And this is why Russia has now demanded that all of their fuel be paid for in rubles, because it's gold-backed, which means it's a secure currency. And this is why Russia is not feeling the financial pain that everyone thought they were. Now, you place that with China, with its massive manpower and military global reach, and then you've got something very, very powerful. You've got the largest nation in the world, and that would create a new balance of power. Secondary, you have this organization called BRICS. Okay, so BRICS was what they were bringing in. BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Yeah, and interestingly, when the UN was sanctioning Russia, one of the only countries that came out in support of Russia was South Africa. So the BRICS organization is a very, very powerful, potentially powerful economic organization that could create that balance against America. And that's what the globalists are trying to do. The globalists, even though a lot of them are Americans, they don't care about the flag. They don't care about the countries. They just care about power. And the only way to have a globalist society, they've really got globalist banking. So there's only 3 countries in the world that do not have a Rothschild central bank. And that is Syria, that is North Korea, and that is, what's the other one? And Iran. Yeah. So guess who we're always going to war against, or potentially against, you know, the 3 people that, you know, don't want to join the gang. So if you run the world's economy, you run the central bank, no business can actually operate without it. That's a good start. So you have a one world bank, and then they use the UN as a one world government, which is unelected. So now they decide who is appointed as our heads. And then you have the World Health Organization, which came to the fore in the pandemics. You create enough pandemics, and the World Health Organization then comes in and starts to stipulate your health policy within your country, even though they're based in Brussels or Switzerland, it becomes a real problem. But that's what the globalists want. One world currency, one world army, one world government, one world court with the UN courts, and one world order, because that is then easy to control.
But how we can actually go our route, don't participate in their agenda?
Well, I mean, the first thing is, of course, is to be aware of it. Most people are not aware, you know, and this is what we found during the pandemic. People said, well, it's the World Health Organization. I mean, why wouldn't we listen to them? You know, because they're the world. But we know that they're politically biased. They hate America and everything it stands for, and would make policies that would disrupt the American economy and stop them from getting out of the pandemic as soon as possible. You know, so the people are being lied to. You know, the UN sounds like a great organization to create peace. The UN has never created peace. I've worked with the UN. I've worked with them in Cyprus. They do nothing. They absolutely do nothing. You know, they turn up in brand new Mercedes cars. They walk around as if they own the place, but nothing is ever done. The UN has never stopped a country being invaded. You know, the UN sanctioned Russia and said, you can't do that. Well, what did Putin do? He did it anyway. And it's happened in Malawi, in Chad, in any place that you want to talk about where there's been conflict. The UN has been a toothless tiger, you know, and it should be defunded. You know, there's no way we should be adopting any principles from the UN. So this is what they're trying to push, because it sounds good. It sounds right. If you're a lower socioeconomic person and you don't quite understand how the world works, when you're told that you can have a universal wage, that's a living wage, so that you can actually afford to live in a small apartment, perhaps have one child, go to work and get a pension because they can't sack you, cradle to the grave, a lot of people would opt for that. And they'll go, yeah, why wouldn't we want to do that? Why take the risk of going to college? Why take the risk of taking these big loans out? Why take the risk of being in competition with others? Why take the risk of getting the sack and being unemployed? Why take the risk of starting your own business and it failing?
Yeah, that's why they don't want to be smart, because all over everybody's screaming, get smart, but nobody hears that.
But that's why the education system, in America, we've had an education system for 200 years, and we're now pushing out more kids that cannot read and write and do basic arithmetic. You know, there's a big push now to get their pronouns right. They can't even read, for God's sake. You know, we need to get real as to what is happening. You know, when as a parent, as I am, as you are, you know, your fundamental concern when you send that kid off to school, because you can't homeschool yourself most of the time, a lot of people are now doing that, is that you want them to come home eventually being able to read, to being able to write, to being able to do basic math, to understand the principles of science, and to socialize and understand how those principles and how that education is learned in the world. Also be useful to have history, so you understand what's going on in the world. Geography. Most people in America couldn't point to Ukraine on a map. They have no idea where it is. You know? So when you understand basic education, it gives you much more of a freedom, critical thinking into the world. But the globalists don't want people critical thinking, because critical thinking involves criticism, and they don't want criticism. They just want you to shut up and do as you're told. You know, so it's up to us. And we're starting to see this now. When you look at the whole news cycle and not just the small parts, you get a big picture of what's going on. You know, and a lot of people just focus on the small things, whether it be gun violence, whether it be education, whether it be, you know, the price of gas, you know, taken into seclusion, each of those becomes problems that people can get emotional about. When you look at the whole thing and you realize this is being contrived, this is no coincidence. Yeah, it's no coincidence at all that we're destroying the energy prevalence in this country for green energy that doesn't even exist. And people say, well, use electric cars. You say, yeah, so when you plug in your electric car, where do you think that electricity comes from? It doesn't come from a friggin' windmill. It doesn't come from a solar panel. It comes from either a nuclear station or a coal-fired power station. So it's a ridiculous situation, totally ridiculous, you know. But you know, and again, when you find out that a lot of these green organizations have been sponsored by the globalist elite and by Russia and places like this, it then becomes a problem. So we're starting to see now pushback. So look at the education. Okay, so we've had all of these problems with, you know, the trans issues and pronouns and teaching of sexuality to young kids. And there's been massive pushback by normal parents. And we're starting to see now that the school boards, which have largely been left with leaning and progressives, are now running for the hills because Mama Bear's coming. And Mama Bear doesn't like people, you know, mucking around with their kids. So we're starting to see that, and that will be a big election thing, much more than abortion, much more than gun rights. Because when you start messing around with people's children, you have real problems, because Mama Bear comes out. So that's what we're gonna see. And during the midterms, which are coming, it's going to be interesting to see who is awakened and who is woke. You know, there's a big difference. It's a massive difference. And I think that you're going to start to see more pushback to middle ground reality. Americans, by and large, are nice people. They're not racist people. You know, I mean, I've been in the military with Americans, and blacks fight alongside Latinos, fight alongside Italians and Greeks, and everyone gets along. You know, but when you divide and conquer and you start making policies, you know, like I read today that there's the schools in Chicago are now changing the grades of the exams by your skin color. So yeah, so if you got 30% in your exam and you're black, they'll put you up to 50% because you're black. But if you're white, you stay at 30 because it's white privilege. You know, I mean, so, but reality steps in at some point. You can fudge everything you like at high school, make people graduate. It doesn't make them smarter just because you graduate them. At some point, they get into the real world, real competition, and they're against real people who do have smarts. And that then becomes a reality check. So we're starting to see that now. I believe that there is going to be a massive push towards the middle ground, you know, back to white picket fences and apple pie and 4th of July and people just getting on as Americans, not as blacks or Hispanics or gays or whatever. I mean, we've got to get back to a situation where the rational becomes the normal and not the irrational and the extremists. And it's interesting because I know one of your questions to me was about UFOs. And it's interesting because with one of my books, Order of the Nephilim Genesis, the preface to that is written by a lady called Carol Rosin. Now, Dr. Carol Rosin was one of the first aeronautical CEOs in America. She was Reagan's spokesperson for Star Wars, but she was also the spokesperson for Dr. Wernher von Braun. Now, Dr. Wernher von Braun was a Nazi rocket scientist that was brought over after the Second World War under a secret operation with the CIA called Paperclip, where the Russians and the Americans split these scientists, and that's what created the new space race. So Wernher von Braun invented the Saturn V rocket, which took us to the moon. Now, on his deathbed, he said to Carol Rosin, he said they'll play, because you're talking about the globalists, he said they'll play 4 cards. He said, first of all, they'll blame it on the Russians. He said, and then there will be a new war. We've got to remember, this is like after the Second World War. He said, it'll be a new war. It will be like not real, but almost like a Cold War. And he said, then they'll blame it on rogue states. He said, states that you've never even heard of. He said, these will then be the big enemy. And people will focus on these rogue states. And we're seeing this now, Iran, North Korea, Syria, Lebanon, you know, all of that, Libya, you know, so that he was right in that one. He said, the third card that they'll play is internal terrorism. He said, because if you've got other countries outside, then you've got an identifiable enemy. But what about the enemy within? He said, so there'll be big pushes to push terrorists into the countries and live there as people, and then they'll be activated. So people will then go against their own people and they'll not know who to trust. That's the third card. And he said, and the fourth card that they'll play, he said, the fourth card is the alien card. He said, and what they'll do, they'll say, yes, aliens do exist and they are a threat to you. At that point, guess what people are going to do? You know, if we knew categorically it was an alien threat and people said, well, we're going to need to put up your taxes because we're going to need this string of Star Wars type weapons out there to fend off the aliens, people go, okay, let's do it because we've seen Star Wars. Yeah, we know what it's all about. We've seen The Mandalorian. We know that these aliens are out there. So that's the fourth card. So it's interesting that I find even up within the last month, UFOs have been around, you know, and been documented since medieval times. You know, they've even found them on the Bayeux Tapestry and all this type of thing. So they've been reported since the very earliest of times. And, Americans have been obviously investigating this, same as the Russians, and the Project Blue Book, and there's never been a definitive answer. It's what they're called unidentified flying objects. And now they're being able to identify them. And I have my own theories. I believe that at least 80% of sightings are of terrestrial origin, which is technology used by the Nazis after the war, and is part of this, the secret government based in Antarctica. And that's the basis of some of my work. But what we're finding now,
is it true that everything can happen only and everything exists because everything is secretly? If this would not be done by secret, everybody would know that we have advanced equipment and advanced military. Now nobody knows anything. Nobody even care about this.
See, if it wasn't see, this is why the CIA they coined the term conspiracy theorists.
Yeah.
CIA brought that in order to make fun of the people that were actually having a look at what was going on, the critical thinkers, saying, yeah, they would wear tinfoil hats and all this type of thing. And largely the populace goes, yeah, right, and believes it. But now, I mean, what I have found is that the time lag between conspiracy theory to conspiracy fact is usually between 3 and 6 months now. It used to be years. I've spoken at MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and right back there, you were seen as a quack, you were seen as fringe. Now it's pretty much mainstream. So we're seeing now what this is likely to be, and the thought of us not having other species in the universe is so outrageous. I mean, just within our galaxy, and there are billions of galaxies, within our galaxy, there are 350,000 what they call life planets. These are planets that have the same type of trajectory as Earth to their sun, that have either water or some basis of simple life. So that's 350,000 options just in our galaxy alone, and there are billions of galaxies. So the chances of us being alone are pretty rare.
Globalists know that information, right? But they don't want us to explore that, right?
Exactly. Most of them have actually been in consultation with alien entities for some while. So as they say, they're among us. And we understand why they wouldn't just come out and do that. Because if you could imagine, so say for instance, the largest religious ideology is Christianity. Okay, so the basic tenet of Christianity is that we're made in God's image. Okay, so imagine that all of the Christians throughout all the world are suddenly confronted by an alien race that comes down and says, yeah, we know God and he doesn't look anything like you. Imagine that. Imagine what that will do to that ideology right there and then. Imagine the Islamic ideology. There is nothing else apart from Allah. Well, yeah, there probably is. So all of a sudden that goes away in an instant. In an instant. So now you've got all of these people that have spent years and sweat equity and effort and energy and prayers and praying 5 times a day to Mecca on your carpet, and now it's wrong. How do you deal with that? For a lot of people, they would either go into denial and try and kill everybody, which is likely to be the case, or there'll be mass suicides, or there'll be such civil disruption as the world just wouldn't be able to work. People will go, well, what's the point? Well, we're all going to die at some point. What's the point in working 9 to 5 if I'm going to die at some point?
And why is this topic about aliens brought only now, not earlier? Because they are technically ready or mass?
Yeah, I think it's time. I mean, mankind has evolved, and we're evolving technically and technologically. And it's interesting because all the clues are in a lot of the TV shows and the films in Hollywood. You got to remember that the writers of these films are tapped into some form of consciousness. So when they get an idea, where's that idea coming from? It's not from within them. They weren't born with that idea. It's not ingrained in their brain. It's just released at a certain point. Something comes through, you know, and it comes through from a different source. We can't define what that source is. It's different for everyone. I have the same thing. I literally just download books, you know, and I just write, and I don't even know where it comes from. But so imagine then that with this consciousness, and I did some research on this, and years ago, there was this syndrome that happened where two films would come out at the same time, two Hollywood movies would come out within the same month, and they were largely the same plot. So Volcano came out, and then 2 weeks later, Dante's Peak came out. Yeah? Both about a super volcano creating devastation in the world. The month after that, there was more volcano activity in the world than has ever been in recorded history.
Manifested.
Who knew? You know. Then you had other ones like White House Down, and what was the other one? Olympus Has Fallen. You know, both plots about the White House being taken over by terrorists, both released within the same month. You know, and then you start to get all of these homegrown terrorists and insurrections, that type of thing going on. So I believe right now that as we grow technologically, as our planes are getting faster, as we're now moving towards Mars, you know, we haven't even really been back to the moon in 50 years. And now Elon Musk is taking us to Mars. When a civilization, when, you know, an Earth-based civilization, you got to remember that right now, every single person that has ever lived as humankind is still on this ball of Earth. Yeah, their bones have decayed. They're in the Earth. They didn't go anywhere else. You know, there's no humans buried on the moon, no people buried on Mars or anything like that. Everyone is here. At some point, when we as a civilization, when we as a species move off planet, we become different. In the same way as the first time that you left your own little island and got on a boat, like the Vikings, and then went to another place and colonized it, it's a game changer. It's a total game changer. So if you could imagine that any alien species is looking at us, because they've already done that. They've already colonized planets. They've already done all this. And they're looking at us and going, let's see what these guys are about. And as soon as they actually step off planet, it's almost like we've either joined the club or we need to be put into line. And at that point, that's when we get first contact. I believe first contact has already happened, probably many, many years ago. But for those reasons that I've articulated, you know, that's the reason that we don't come out and go, yeah, there's aliens, because that would just freak everybody out. The markets would collapse. Social disorder would just make the world ungovernable. So I understand why they do it. But at some point, the truth will come out, and it's going to be harsh.
How do they choose who to contact? How do they know who is the main person they can talk to?
See, that I have no idea. I used to believe, you know, that because I used to watch a TV show back in the, must have been the 70s, the 80s, called Cosmos with Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan he's dead now, unfortunately, but he was like the guy when it actually came to how the universe worked. You know, between him and Stephen Hawking, you know, you had pretty much a good idea of how the universe was functioning. So if an alien species came down and says, take us to your leader, he is likely to be the guy that they'll take him to. Because, you know, all of these politicians, I mean, imagine all running around trying to be big friends with the new aliens coming through to see if they could get them as an alliance, you know. You'd have all that nonsense. And then you get all this abduction stuff. I did a lot of research on abductions, and it just didn't seem to make sense. You know, so you got an alien species that flies light years across the various different universes to come and abduct a potato grower in Idaho. You know, what the hell does he know? You know, and they take him up into the thing and they probe him and, you know, put him back down again and cut up his cattle. And it's like, why would you do that? It doesn't make any sense to me. But there is a lot of theory that at the highest levels of government, that alien contact has been created. You know, there's thought to be at least 14 different species here on the planet as we speak. So
how
I
many?
mean, who knows? No one really has a definitive answer. It's all conjecture. You know, there are little bits of evidence which, when you build it up, you can get a pretty reasonable hypothesis as to what is going on. But it's not actual. But then again, what is actual fact? You know, you could actually have an incident right now, an actual factual incident that is being photographed, that is being documented. You put it on CNN, there's one spin that way. You put it on Fox, it's another spin that way. It looks like two separate incidents because people are now, they're receiving their information in a bubble that they're familiar with.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, this is happening and it's Putin's fault, or this is happening and it's Biden's fault. And people go, and they believe exactly what they're being told, you know. And this is why there is such distrust within the media, because the media has now stopped being a news network. It has stopped just giving you the news, just like the old Walter Cronkite. You know, it didn't care who he pissed off. It was just like, this is the news. No opinion, not I think this, or this should be like that. It's like, this is actually what happened. And that's actually what news is. Yeah, it just, that's what it means, you know. But now everyone on the news are just talking heads. They're commentators. They take a story and they put a spin on it according to their own ideology. And people will tune into them if that ideology matches their own.
Because everybody right now, consumers, nobody cook anymore. So
Yeah.
everybody just eat whatever been prepared for them and served. That's it.
Exactly right.
Yeah, the better.
And that is a typical basis of a globalist socialist agenda. Do not think for yourself. Do not try to create anything yourself. Just create what we tell you to do for the better good, for the greater good of mankind. And it sounds great. I mean, and this is why Marxism and Leninism never really went away. You know, I mean, they created this ideology based upon what is essentially animal farm. You know, it's based upon socialism is based upon animal husbandry. Okay.
It's crazy. I don't like this animal farm because they teach children through the book Animal Farm. When I saw this kind of book, I was thinking it's a joke. But then I see they study. I said, what you study? You have to study all humans or animals on the farm, but not humans as animals on the farm. It's ridiculous.
Well, see, Animal Farm, the same as 1984 by George Orwell, you know, were meant to be warnings. There were warnings for future generations as to what could happen, you know. And now when you see, and we talk about things being Orwellian, there's actually a word for it now based upon the work of George Orwell. And as they say, you know, 1984 was meant to be a warning, not a manual. And people are actually taking some of these things, you know, and with, like, you know, Lord of the Flies, Animal Farm, you know, these are books which were put into the education system in order to be able to inspire critical thinking, but to act as a warning that people should look at treating each other like normal humans, not as animals, you know. And socialism does that. This is why we call them sheeple. You know, it puts people into, it carves them up into certain species. It makes them operate within the familiarity of that species. It gives them largely a place to be, you know, in the farm, where they have freedom to walk around, they have freedom to eat, they have freedom to breed.
You
But
see,
at some point they get fleeced and they get killed.
okay, it is the same concept, but from two different worlds. from USSR, where I'm coming from, and America. It is a two different ways to present the same concept. We were born on the cartoons where animals in the forest or anywhere, they have kind of own, skills and own whatever is going on. And at the same time, we see cartoons about humans, and humans act as humans. So we don't correlate them together. We don't cross these things. So that's why, to me, Animal Farms, it is a so bad example and so bad direction. And eventually we are here with that direction. But people literally...
Well, the basic tenets of Animal Farm is that all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. That's the fundamental message. And that is the typical message of communism, where you have, the party members, which are still part of the proletariat. However, they're different because they're slightly elevated, and as soon as you get that communism goes out the window. It's not communism anymore, it's fascism. And this is the problem. We're doing this here in the West economically. So in the USSR, it was done ideologically. Here it's done economically, so that, if you got more money, you got more respect, you got a better lifestyle. But who did you have to then step on to get the money through capitalism in order to be able to increase your lot in life? So the Russians would look at that and go, well, that's evil. That's an evil system, because it means that the people that are like the low minorities or people that don't have the smarts, they're going to be pushed down by the people that do have the smarts, and they're going to be marginalized, and they're going to be put into ghettos. And yeah, that's actually true. That actually happens. We look at the communist system and we go, well, look at the bread queues. Look at the grayness of the bone. There's no art. There's no innovation. There's no nothing. There's just control. And we look at that as being evil. So that's how you get people to fight each other. Because if they think it's a fundamental evil, then they'll actually go to war on that. And that's what we're finding right now. If you can demonize the opposition, people will step up and sign up to die. That's what's happening. It's happening in Ukraine right now. Yeah. To the point where people were coming from other countries to sign up to die for Ukraine. 3 months before, they didn't even know where Ukraine was.
That's right. A lot of Americans right now, I see, fighting there, but they're...
But then on the other side, you got the Chechens, who the Russians were fighting not so long ago, and Georgians, which they're still fighting. And now he's trying to bring Syrians in, so this is where the power comes, and you then create almost like it's almost like an arena for people to bring their hatred to the arena, where they now have carte blanche. They get, here's a rifle, you can kill someone. No one's going to give you a hard time. No one's going to put you in jail, for going killing someone. And we're seeing this on both sides of the aisle,
What is the strongest right now? What is stronger than a modern weapon? And what is a modern weapon right now? Is it ideology or it is a technical?
I've always believed that the strongest weapon available to mankind is the thoughts, it's ideas. Okay, so he who has the most ideas, he who has the greatest innovation, he who has the greatest understanding of tactics will always win. Okay, so in military doctrine, it is always said that the art of strategy is to engage an opponent at a time and place of your choosing. So if you're the commander on the ground and you get to choose when and where you fight, it doesn't necessarily have to be that you're the strongest. Yeah, you just have to be in the right position. Look at the Spartans in Thermopylae. The 300 Spartans actually stopped 1.5 million Persians because they chose the time and the place. So I believe the greatest threat to the globalists is ideas, fresh ideas. And that is why they start with school. They start by making sure everyone goes into like the liberal arts, or everyone comes out as a left-wing activist, you know, and that's largely what's happening in our education system. So you basically stop critical ideas. When people then want to talk about things, they go, I'm offended, I need a safe space, and close down those ideas. That's not what universities were meant for. Universities were meant for a confluence of ideas, even if it was ideas that conflicted with your own. That's refreshing, that's encouraging. But what we're seeing is that the left wing can't deal with unfortunate truths. So they just close everything down, and they just claim that it's either offensive or it's racist or it's something like this, you know?
They just grab that kid with the idea and make them to work for them. That's it.
Yeah. So we need ideas, and they often say there is nothing as powerful in this world as an idea whose time has come. Imagine that we all got the idea at the same time that peace was a really good thing.
Yeah.
And that we actually didn't need weapons of war, that we didn't need, I mean, wouldn't it be nice to be able to sack all the lawyers because people didn't have litigation, because people would just work it out and they would just like come to an understanding. Imagine that we had great health so that we could sack all the doctors and we could get rid of cancer specialists because there would be no cancer. All of that is available to us, but only if we have the ideas to do that. And if we can bring those to the party, we can change the way the world works. Right now, most of the people in control don't want it to change.
That's right.
They like the control.
Yeah.
You know, cancer is like $180 billion industry a year. No one wants cancer to go away in the pharmaceutical.
Oh yeah, it's
they want more pandemics. They want more boosters because that's where they make their money. You know, the people in the military industrial complex, they don't want civilianized weapons. They want to go to war because war is profit.
Yeah.
Yeah? Politicians, they often say that, politics is show business for ugly people, because they get to talk on TV about things. So they're looking for problems. They're looking for a crisis to jump on and say, I align with this crisis and we should be doing this. Nothing ever gets done. It's a talking point for 2-3 days. They get their little, flush, and then it's all gone again. No one wants to change. So the only way that we can create change is we create the change within ourselves initially. We got to have those ideas ourselves. We got to create that change with us. We need to be that change. And in doing so, you then set an example for others to do likewise. You get enough people that are actually rational, that are middle of the road, that are independent thinkers, that are critical thinkers, that are compassionate, that are loving. And you get all those people together. What's the result? It's not going to be war. It's going to be peace, and it's going to be an idyllic situation. But that's not what the globalists want.
Yeah, and percentage-wise, we don't have to have a lot of people like this. It will be enough 10%. They can automatically affect others.
You need what is called critical mass.
Yeah.
So it's like a snowball. You start it off. All the effort is in the initial rolling of the snowball. Once it gets critical mass, it just picks up. And because people are who they are, most people are followers. If there is enough critical mass of free thinking individuals, people will join that. And they'll join that rather than join the hate.
That's right, because I had my own experience. When we had the problems with all this mask show. So I go everywhere without it. And I was walking into Target, and one girl, she's young, and she looked at me, how I'm acting. I'm older than her. And she looked at me and she said, you know what? Thank you very much for showing me how to act. You've been an example right now for me. I said,
exactly right.
Better follow what you just saw.
Yeah. And we must lead by example. A lot of people say things must change, but they don't want to create a change within themselves. You know, they want you to change. They don't want them to change.
That's
You know,
right.
so we need to get back to a totally different way of thinking across the board, absolutely across the board. You know, we need to change the way we look at things in medical. You know, right now we wait for things to go wrong and then we try and medicate it. Whereas you look at the Japanese system, you know, every Japanese family has a family doctor, and that doctor gets paid every month by that family until someone gets sick in the family. He doesn't get paid then.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it's his job to create a preventative care system for that family, to make sure that they're eating the right things, that they're doing the right things, that they're getting exercise, you know, and that's what the family doctor does. Right now, all these doctors are doing is sitting in their waiting rooms, waiting to prescribe the drugs that have been sold to them, that they get commission on by the drug salesman that's been in their office 20 minutes before.
That's all, yeah. And before we will finish, I would love to ask a couple of more questions. Does the owners of humanity have any sense of technocratic consolidation, and which one?
You mean technocracy?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, see, technocracy is an ideology, and technocracy doesn't involve democracy. So you have different types of ideologies. You have like monarchies, which means that it's run by a king or a queen. You have a democracy, which means it's run by the people. You have a meritocracy, which means it's run by the smartest people. And then you have a technocracy, which was basically debunked in the 1919 as being totally unworkable, because technocracy basically does not value human beings. It values things, you know, hence the tech in the words. So we started to see this in Italy. We started to see this in Greece. So when they had problems with their political lives, especially after the pandemic, they started putting in prime ministers that they were just appointed. Yeah, they weren't being voted in. They were saying, this is the best guy at the time. And that is what a technocracy does. So it takes away the power of the people to determine who represents them. You've got to remember that in democracy, certainly, well, America is actually a constitutional republic. It's not a democracy, you know. So, and that's different. A lot of people don't understand that. They say, oh, we need to protect our democracy. It's not a democracy. You know, it's a constitutional republic. So it's a republic created with a Senate and a Congress that is run by a constitution. That's it. If you go against the constitution, it doesn't matter that the vast amount of people don't like it. Under a democratic rule, they would just go, well, we don't like that. Let's just stop it. All right. That's not going to happen in America. Yeah. So in technocracy, it means that a finance minister would be the best CPA that they could find. Doesn't matter if people like him or not. He runs the country, and he runs it like an accountant, you know, in a business. You know, that the prime minister would make decisions based upon what he thought was right for the country without giving any thought to how the people are going to react. A technocracy will go, we need that country because we need its resources. Yeah, it's going to probably cost us 10 million people to die to go and get it, but 10 million, whatever, weigh up the numbers, we'll go do it. That's what a technocracy does.
Yeah, this is what exactly happening right now. And at this present level of human personality development, is it possible life to be without war or without rules or conditions?
It is, but that would be called a globalist fascist state. Okay, so if you had a globalist fascist state where you couldn't earn money outside of what the money that was being given to you, and they knew exactly how much you're being given because there's no cash, it goes into your bank account, which is monitored by the IRS, who then take their money out. You have a police force that is the only people that are armed, so everyone has to just do what they're told. any criminals are summarily executed, you know, and taken out of the system, and people just work to keep working to keep the country going, yeah, like an engine. That would create peace if the whole world did it. But does anyone really want to live like that?
Oh my gosh, it's horrible.
But that is what a globalist fascist state would do. So it would be peaceful. Yes, it would.
It will be no rules,
People
right?
would be fed. People would be fed, and it means that there would be no poverty, because people would be on a minimum wage. It would mean there would be no child famine, because you wouldn't be allowed to breed any more than you can feed. So you couldn't have 5 children. You'd do the Chinese one-child rule thing, you know?
Yeah, means your potential, nobody would be care about it, and you will be able to get more and achieve more.
But see, that is how you run a farm.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly how you run a farm. Going back to my original point, that it's basic, you know, that communism and fascism are basic animal husbandry. You know, the farms are fairly peaceful places. You go to any farm, you don't get cows fighting each other. You don't get cows fighting the sheep or cockerels fighting the dogs. Everyone is in their place, they're doing their thing, and they're happy within their own little bubbles. The only person that knows what's going on is the farmer.
So conclusion is not to be in fear and not to be afraid to open up your potential and take responsibility. And doesn't matter what people say to you and about you, right?
Don't be afraid of the opposition. You know, they've got to be afraid of you, you know, and when people come together, they're an amazingly powerful force. We largely have forgotten as people how powerful we actually are, because people are so busy dividing us by male, female, race, pronouns, sexuality, whatever they can draw another line through, like pizza, keep cutting it and cutting it and cutting it. Once we realize that we are whole, that we are one, then they will run for the hills because they have no control over us.
Basically, they're using that. They're very united.
It's called divide and conquer. Yes. I mean, it's a standard thing that governments have done since governments were formed.
So what you can say in order that people will, after this video, right away change their behavior if they have to? Or
what I would say, the simple thing that you could do is tap on your neighbor's door and ask them if they're okay. Do they need anything? Is there anything you could do to help their life? You don't know what's going on next door. You don't know whether they can't afford food. You don't know whether the car's broken down, the husband's having an affair. You have no idea. So find out, you know. So just by giving that outward compassion with no expectation of any reward coming back.
Right, or bring a pie like we always do. I always share with my neighbors. I feed them.
See, that's the thing. That's what people can actually do. These are action steps. Yeah, most people don't take action because they go, well, the government's too big, we can't do anything. You know, it's not about that. You take small incremental steps on a very small, you know, community level. Community. The word community means common unity.
Yes.
A unity of common purpose. So we need to get back to that understanding. Yeah. You know, find out what is common between you and your neighbor. Because in that common, people come together because they see that there is no division.
That's right. Mutual respect and support. And this is it what we need. That's
exactly right. So that's what people can do. It sounds simple, but it actually is. But if more people did that, and people did that en masse, imagine 1 million people, imagine 10 million people, 30 million people giving compassionate action with no expectation of reward. How would that change the dynamics of America today? I tell you what, it will change it exponentially.
Yeah.
Without any doubt.
Wonderful.
Do we have the courage to do that? Do we have the courage to step out of our comfort zone to go against what people would say that we should be, or we should react because we're white, brown, black, whatever. Do we have the courage to step out of that and actually be who we actually are as compassionate human beings that actually care for other people? Guess what? People that are different races and different. I remember Sting, who wrote a song called Russians, and it was during the Cold War. And part of the lyrics was, the Russians love their children too.
The Russians
love their children too.
Yeah.
That's a commonality.
Yeah.
We all love our children. That's a good start.
Yeah, it's a wonderful start. Okay, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Always a pleasure to speak to you, Elena.
Yeah, and I would love to talk next time about your books. Absolutely.
Well, we're going to be doing a massive launch. We got like 17 books ready to go. I've been very, very prolific, and they cover everything from, conspiracies to what's going on, to personal development, to humor, everything. So it's going to be an exciting year.
Take another video, and we will go with explanation on each book.
Love it.
A lot of information.
Okay, we'll do that.
Okay.
Take care.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye.